Okay, good morning, everybody in I was gonna say radio land, YouTube land, right? I got a very interesting and important comment from. I'm not going to say the name of God, but it says why, and then the AH. We would say ka if we're not. It's not in the context of prayer. When it's in the context of prayer, I do say that name. Just two letters, yud and then hey. We say UK or we say ka when we're speaking colloquially. Führer was the next part. He has a picture of a lion, probably like the Lion of Judah. And he's talking about a comment in a video I made, I don't know how long ago, probably a few years ago, that the Bible, that the Big Bang proves the Bible is true. And he said, what are you talking about? The Big Bang is a lie that's there to take us away from scriptural truth. And he brought, from what he understands to be evidence from the Bible, contrary to the Big Bang theory. Now, one thing you have to understand, the Big Bang is simply the Big Bang. It's not everything that came after that. That's Aleph, that's A, that's bullet point one. But before we get to that, we just want to reflect on what today is. An interesting day. The story goes, I believe it was Rabbi Kranz from Richmond, but maybe it happened more than once. Probably he heard it from someone else, and he, and when I say Rabbi Kranz, Rabbi Yaakov Kranz, he was the father of Riasel, who's now in Richmond. And the story goes, he came to I think it was a Jewish Federation meeting or something, as a rabbi in the community. When I was a Rav in Richmond, we were part of the executive board of the Jewish Federation. And I would sometimes just go because I was invited, and why not? And I know a lot of my colleagues didn't like to go to these things, but for me, I was always interested to show up, to be there, and I had a consistent record of attendance at these types of meetings and a lot of other meetings. And to me, it was always nice to be at a community meeting as opposed to a synagogue meeting. Synagogue meetings were always horrible, but community meetings were always rather pleasant, even if I disagreed with some of the things. Didn't matter much. They knew I was the odd man out with my funny hat and my funny haircut and everything. So, I was much younger at the time, obviously. So, time has gone by, not much younger, but younger. And as time goes by, we see different things like this. But the story goes, Yaakov Kranz, before my time, in Richmond, he showed up at a Jewish Federation meeting, and or maybe it was a Jewish educators meeting. I don't remember what it was, but he was talking about, what was the name of the mother of Jesus. Again, everyone said Mary, and the mother of Moses was, and nobody knew, was Yocheved. In English I say Jochebed, I know. He said, and then Jesus' birthday, that's all, Christmas, December 25th. And Moses' birthday is, nobody knew, is today. It's Zion Adar, the 7th day of the month of Adar. It's a week before Purim, but this year's a leap year, so it's a month before Purim. And then we'll do it again next month. But the interesting thing is, so it's the birthday and the Yortzeit of Moshe Rabbeinu. He wanted to demonstrate how so many Jews they know more about Christianity than they know about Judaism. They know more about Jesus than they know about Moses. And why is that? And the lack of Jewish education. And I don't know if that was his own idea. Probably it was something he read somewhere else and that someone else had done it. But I understand he was a very talented person, and I never met him. Again, it was before my time, but he was able to press the right buttons with that. So today's the birthday of Moses, and also the yard site of Moses. It's also the yard site of a tzaddik who I love very much, and I have a little bit of a devotion to, is Rabbi Isaac of Kalev, the founder of the Kalever dynasty. I mean, certainly have a devotion to the current Kalever Rebbe. That's my Rebbe. But if I don't follow, I'm not necessarily a chassid, Kalever chassid, but I'm a chassid of the Kalever Rebbe. So some of my friends would say that about their relationships with certain Rebbes, that even if they're not this type of chassid, but they're a chassid of this Rebbe, And I try not to identify particularly as any one type of chassid, but I remember one time I was in Washington D.C. and I met Rabbi Shem Tov, who's the shliach from Chabad in Washington D.C. That's where Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump daven by his bismedrash, and he knew who I was. He's like, I know who you are. You're a Kalever chassid. People say I'm a Bialer chassid. I was a Gaba by Bialer Rebbe's, more than one Bialer Rebbe, and I wouldn't say I'm a Bialer chassid, but the Kalever chassid that I'll take. If you want to say I'm a Satmar chassid, I mean, I don't wear the plachik him. I send my kids to Satmar schools, and I probably follow a lot, not everything like Satmar, but a lot more things from Satmar, and my family's from Satmar, but that's before Satmar Rav was there. But I mean, my Zedas, whose yard site's coming up this week, where Moshe Ari Kruller, he was Rav in Krula, and technically he was the Rav of the whole area. I mean, Krula is really part of Satumare, the greater Satumare area. He was the Rav of really all of those towns in that area. And we'll talk more about Moshe Ari Kruller. But Lahavdil ben Kodesh L'chol. So he said today is the birthday of Moses, and it's also two other famous birthdays in the secular world on the secular calendar. Obviously, the birthday of Moses we're talking on the Jewish calendar, and on the secular calendar there are two men who were born on the exact same day. Were Abraham Lincoln and Charles Darwin. Today's their birthday, and so I guess we could say they share the same Hebrew birthday too, because they were both born the same day. I remember we had a Shabbaton a few years ago, and it was this time of the year, President's Day weekend there, and I said, we could say it was Shabbos, it was Friday night, we just said Kiddush. I said, in the Kiddush we mentioned both of the birthdays, because Lincoln would be Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim, and Darwin would be Zeichel Ma'aseh Bereishis. That Lincoln would be in memory of the Exodus, and Darwin would be in memory of creation. And obviously, once we're talking about Lincoln and Moshe Rabbeinu having the same birthday this year, Lahavdil, and so the whole Indian of Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim is there, remembering the Exodus and freeing the slaves and so forth. Although in our tradition we don't talk about Moses being the one who freed the slaves, we talk about God being the one who freed the slaves, and so too we could say the same thing in America. It was by divine providence, and Abraham Lincoln was a tool, but what a tool he was in God's hand. He was what he accomplished. Being the first Republican president, restoring the ideals of individual freedom to America, even though certain things, because of the war, he didn't, taking away the writ of habeas corpus and things during the war and things. But with that being said, there's the connection there, but then the connection also, we could talk about the connection with Darwin and the connection back to what we were discussing before, and maybe we'll make other videos discussing things. Isaac Kalever was the first Kalever Rebbe was one of the first Hasidic Rebbes in Hungary, and a tremendous person, and his songs are well beloved, but also his teachings, which are maybe not as well known, but because of my connection to the current Kalav Rebbe, every now and then we're worthy to get a teaching here and there, especially this week. The Kalav Rebbe Shlita, in his writings, he has Lou Gehrig's disease. He writes just with his eye, and what we read this past Shabbos, certain things from Rise of Kalav, maybe we could talk later. I do want to respond to this comment on this video. It's very important to respond. I don't have all the Marmakaimus in front of me. I don't have all of the verses and everything. I don't even remember everything that was written, but it's a very, very important thing to discuss. And I think we have to, set some parameters here. I think we would be making a mistake if we just automatically take everything in the Bible at face value. We'd also be making a mistake if we take nothing in the Bible at face value. And I think the real answer that we have to recall is that the Bible can be read on many different levels. We speak of Pshat, Remez, Drush, and so the Pardes, the four levels of biblical understanding: the simple, plain meaning, the hints, the homiletical understanding, and the mystical, secret understanding. And this goes back to kind of what we spoke about in many videos, how Carl Jung, in his teachings in his psychology, spoke of two great informers of truth being logos and mythos, the plain literal meaning and the mythological meaning, and how myth is not necessarily, today we try to dispel myths, and no, myth is an informer of truth, but it's a poetic informant of truth, and in many ways Drush and Remez, Drush and Sod are all in that area of mythos, but in certain ways there are other things. I mean, in Judaism, we do have to recognize there is a biblical tradition, and what is called the Judeo-Christian tradition, and included in that is the Judeo-Christian ethic. It's part of the tradition, and this tradition is all based in Scripture. But the question is how do we read Scripture? I saw just a headline this morning on Mosaic magazine about the Bible as literature, and we lose something by simply seeing Scripture in a literary sense. And I didn't read the article because I think you only get 2 articles a month, so I was like, hedging my bets which article. There was one article about the education, Yafet, this, and religious freedom, and that was something that piqued my interest a little bit more, even though it was just reiterating the same things I've been saying for a long time. But the problem that we have sometimes as traditionalists is that we fail to see the literary beauty of Scripture. We tend to see Scripture as so much part of our lives and so integral to our lives that we we just it's just who we are, and to look at it in any way other than in a sacred way seems almost anathema to many of us. But it certainly is anathema to see Scripture as solely being literature, but it's not necessarily not literature. And so too, I would say, seeing Scripture not as science, because science indicates that it's going through the scientific method is how it's understood today. So not in the modern view of what science means, but if we see science as a study, that's also not generally how it's approached. But the question is, do we look at Scripture necessarily to inform us of truths that could be found scientifically? The answer is maybe. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But I would say it's never seen in the Jewish tradition. I'm saying in the classical Jewish tradition, the fundamental of the rabbinical tradition, not a solo scriptura approach, but a traditionalist approach. It's never seen as it has to be this way. Meaning, that's the whole point of, the Talmudic discourse, is to say, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. I mean, we see even that the sages were willing to say when they were talking to the Greek scientists and they were discussing back and forth what exactly is the truth. And you can find that in the Jewish tradition, we have to be intellectually honest. You can find both. You can find just as much evidence that the world is round as that the world is flat. You can find just as much evidence for a geocentric model as for a heliocentric model. And there were great rabbis, great rabbinical authorities throughout the ages who postulated both theories in their reading of Scripture. And so by that, it's impossible to pontificate and say, I mean, essentially, Nachmanides, I remember just a memory I have from learning in yeshiva. Someone asked Rabbi Zev Leff, we had asked the rabbi with Rabbi Leff, and when I was in Derech at Or Sameach, and Rabbi Leff, they asked him, one of the boys asked him, why does Maimonides, tell us that, speak of a geocentric model? He seems to understand that the world is round, but he seems to understand that the sun and all the stars and everything go around the earth, and he had to try to figure out rationally and scientifically how to explain the planets, which classically is not how we understand what a planet is today, but the planets were those mysterious stars that didn't stay where they're supposed to be, and they would move around in relation to the other stars. And so, and in that sense, the sun and the moon and what we understand to be the planets that were known at the time were called planets because they moved, because they didn't stay consistent with where they were in relation to the other stars, whereas the other stars stayed pretty much consistent in their movement. And why did that happen? And so Maimonides took a Ptolemaic or Aristotelian approach and understood it that way as the Greek scientists understood it at the time. and obviously earlier than the time of Maimonides. And Nachmanides, who was generally defending Maimonides on most things, but every now and then he would disagree. Nachmanides, who was, lived, I think their lives interlapped a little bit, but he was essentially from the next generation after Maimonides, or 2 generations after Maimonides. Nachmanides said this was the mistake that Maimonides made by believing science instead of, accepting the Greek science instead of accepting the Jewish tradition. That's the way Rabbi Leff. I never learned that Ramban inside, the Nachmanides inside. So I can't attest to what it actually says there, but that's because quite often we see certain things will be, you'll hear things taught in one way, and maybe if you learn it yourself, you see something different than other people see. And I'm not saying other people are wrong. I'm just saying, like I always talk about the Chavas Yor about learning Kabbalah, where plainly at the end of the Tshuva, he said, no, we shouldn't learn Kabbalah, but except for big Talmidei Chachamim, but the Hamonam, the regular Jew, should read Zohar regularly. So, to us, Zohar is Kabbalah, and the answer is no. It isn't. It's Medrash, really. It's a Kabbalistic Medrash, but it's perhaps more in the area of Drush than it is in the area of Sod. Really is probably the best way to approach that. But there are aspects of Sod in the Zohar, but that's not what we're talking about right now. But even in the Zohar, we have these types of things that discuss scientific truths and what do these mean and so forth. So these are the types of issues to address here. I don't know why people get into that right lane if they're not turning. There's not even anybody there. What are they doing? I would go in front of them and pass them. At least this guy's turning. So anyway, we can point to scripture. Isaiah speaks of Chuk ha'aretz, the circle of the earth, which would seem to indicate that the earth is round. We can discuss where it says, in Job, Tola eretz al blima, that God hangs the earth on nothing. So again, which seems to point to the scientific truths. But again, this commenter on my video, he brought his understanding of scripture to say that the earth is flat and with a solid firmament dome on top and so forth. And the answer that I have to that is it doesn't really matter. As far as Judaism is concerned. And by virtue of that, it doesn't matter ultimately to biblical tradition. The only way that things like this can matter is on the level of denomination, both in Christianity and Judaism, and truthfully in Islam. It's essentially the denominational differences that require one belief over another. And when I say that, I mean that to say that it is 100% kosher to believe that the earth is flat, and that there is a dome firmament, and it's 100% kosher to believe that the earth is round, and that there's a geocentric theory model, and there's a 100% kosher to believe that the Earth is round with a heliocentric one. And it doesn't really matter among these different things which ones you believe, as long as the main thing I would say is that God is the one who did it. That actually matters. That God is responsible for creation, and in that saying, I would say it's just as kosher to believe that God created the world less than 6,000 years ago in 7 days, and it's just as kosher to believe that God created the world billions of years ago, and it's just as kosher to believe that God, as Medrash says, created worlds and destroyed worlds before he made this world. It's just as kosher to believe that in a materialistic sense, and it's just as kosher to believe that in a spiritual sense, and speaking of spiritual worlds. The main things in Judaism is whatever psak halacha, and it does come down to the denominationalism in a certain sense, but for a Jew, for a pious Jew who believes in rabbinical tradition, the main things are really the Piskei Halacha of the Sanhedrin. Those are the fundamentals. Meaning, however the rabbis said something in the sense of this is law, that's what matters. And everything else is up to debate. And so traditionally we do follow our more or less parochial or local traditions, meaning to say, all Jews agree that there are 5 types of grains that it's possible to make matzah from, and that and those same 5 grains can become chametz, and so you fulfill your obligation with matzah on Passover, and you violate on Passover the prohibition. And then those 5 types of grains are what, when we're talking in the realm of chametz and matzah. Now, not everyone agrees what those 5 are. Shibboleth Shmuel is traditionally identified as oats, and most likely it's not oats. The way I understand it is that one should not fulfill his obligation with oat matzah on Passover if he has any other choice, but one may eat oat matzah, and also that one should avoid oat chametz, just to be careful as far as that's concerned. That's how it's generally understood, but there are opinions that differ and say you could actually eat any form of oats on Passover. That's a small minority opinion, which in my opinion should not be followed. That's enough of a small minority opinion that, and it's not only my opinion, but it's the overwhelming majority opinion, that I would say that it's enough of a doubt that oats might be Shibboleth Shmuel, that one should only eat oats in the form of matzah and not any other form on Passover. And but it's we don't really know for sure. And for that reason, similarly, it might be ideal to, if you can avoid it. I mean, most people eat wheat matzah, but some people are gluten intolerant to things. Some might eat spelt matzah, barley matzah perhaps, rye matzah, or oat matzah. They do make oat matzah, but again, the question is, that can one fulfill the obligation, because it is a matter of debate and doubt. So if we don't even know the identity of a particular type of grain, now with that being said, when it comes, and the reason I bring this up really is not this point that I was about to make, but the main point I want to make was in the Jewish tradition, there are some people, they don't eat rice, they don't eat corn, they don't eat these other items on Passover, and there's really no reason not to, other than it's a family tradition. And some people would say, even if it is a family tradition, they should allow eating it. Other people say, well, what's the big deal to not eat it for a week? And with those things, it's up to the family tradition. If you're, certainly, even among the Sephardic Jews, some people don't eat rice on Passover. Some people do. And among the Ashkenazim, most don't, but some do, and some say that today we all should, and some hold on to the old tradition. Personally, I don't. So personally, I'm strict, and I don't eat it. And the same thing, I don't eat what do you call it? Gebrats, things like that. But the truth is, historically speaking, there's no reason to prohibit that. For me, it's more a cultural thing. Just like I wear a shtreimel Shabbos, and there's no halachic reason to wear a shtreimel. I wear white socks. It would be funny if I ate matzah balls, if I ate knedlach the whole week of Pesach. The last day I do it. I enjoy that, and for me, it's Einik Yontiv, it's Simchas Yontiv, and for other people, it's the opposite. Elu. Everybody has to understand their own thing. And the same thing, you don't really need to wear shtreimel, you don't even really need to wear a black hat, you don't need to, these types of things. A lot of these cultural things, they're not really that important, but it is what it is. And we gotta, learn to see the forest through the trees, and not get obsessed with minutia. Other issues that we could discuss here. So back to this: if we don't know enough to identify something that's very important in Jewish law, which one of these items is the Shibboleth Shul? Is it oats, or is it some other form of wheat, a different species? I forgot, because I've heard other items that were identified as Shibboleth Shul. How are we supposed to be able to identify these types of questions? NASA's lying to us about the firmament, these types of ideas that a lot of people have. When we start getting into that, then we're going to start to doubt everything. Why are they sending up those rocket ships? People, plenty of people have seen the rocket ships go up, Why are they spending all this money just to fool us? to think that it's possible to go into space, and it's they're just making movies just to fool us, and it's I don't know. It's rather far-fetched, but I'm not going to say someone's a heretic for believing that. As far as I know, in the mainstream, even the ultra-Orthodox Jewish world, I don't know anybody who denies, that part. I know that I heard that the Satmarov was very upset that people went to the moon, and it bothered him. I don't know in which sense it bothered him. I don't think there's ever a denial that it happened. And talking to Satmarov from, that's probably, in the mainstream, the most extreme to a certain extent, although not really. I consider him actually to be the most moderate in many ways and most down to earth. But I know, a lot of people, and someone who probably was not knowledgeable about a lot of the scientific things. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But really, to him, it was, the knowledge was about the Torah, and he got, he knew Shas cold. He learned. He learned 14 block Gemara every day. He knew all of that, and he understood it. He didn't just read it, but maybe he did know about science. I have no idea, So, and it's quite possible that he did. So these types of questions, we have to examine them late for work. I don't want to be late. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe.